on a day-to-day basis, and he's a very dangerous man.
I said turn it on your camera so I can see you.
Pakistani national Altaf Khanani, a key financier for
In the world of global finance, not every empire is built in daylight. Some thrive in silence, moving billions without a trace. This is the story of Altaf Khanani. This isn't fiction. This is the real story of the world's most dangerous shadow banker and how he almost got away with it. Chapter 1. The Twin from Karachi. In the labyrinthine alleys of Karachi's bustling business districts, few names evoked more whispers than Altaf Khanani. Born on May 2, 1961, into a conservative Memon family recently resettled from Gujarat, India, his early life blended into the backdrop of Pakistan's evolving commercial elite. The Memons, historically known for their acumen in trade and finance, had long held sway in Pakistan's business corridors. For the Khanani family, however, that legacy began modestly. Altaf's father, Abdul Sattar Khanani, was a street-level dealer. His business was unglamorous, running small-scale currency exchanges, dealing in gold, and dabbling in cross-border trade, all while maneuvering the legal ambiguities of Pakistan's burgeoning financial sector. Abdul Sattar's trade wasn't illegal, but it operated in that gray space between regulation and exploitation, a place Altaf would one day turn into a global empire. Altaf was born a twin. His brother, Javed Khanani, shared his blood but not necessarily his path. Where Javed sought legitimacy, building a corporate brand through Khanani and Kalia International, Altaf moved silently into the shadows. It was a dichotomy, one brother operating in boardrooms, the other in backrooms. Together, they formed a peculiar symbiosis that would drive billions through the arteries of the global financial system. Their bond was unshakable in the early years. Karachi's financial sector in the 1980s was largely unregulated, providing fertile ground for innovation or exploitation. Javed, alongside Hanif and Abdul Kalia, launched KKY in 1983. It would go on to become one of Pakistan's largest foreign exchange companies. Meanwhile, Altaf began perfecting an older, more opaque system, Hawala, an informal money transfer network operating on trust, secrecy, and speed. While Javed's KKI operated under licenses and legal frameworks, Altaf's domain was off the books, global in reach, and entirely deniable. The Hawala system allowed him to move massive sums across borders without detection, bypassing conventional banks and scrutiny. It was within this ecosystem that Altaf would build his underground empire. Tragedy would strike Javed in 2016. Under the weight of federal investigations and crumbling fortunes, Javed reportedly fell from the 8th floor of a Karachi office building. His death was labeled a suicide, though conspiracy theories linger to this day. For Altaf, the loss was more than personal. It signified the collapse of the public front. With Javed gone and KKI under intense scrutiny, Altaf's shadow operation was exposed to new dangers. But Altaf was no amateur. It was the calculated evolution of a street dealer's son, one who understood early that the real power lay not in wealth itself, but in the ability to move it invisibly across oceans and borders. And move it he did. Chapter 2. The Empire Without Borders. Behind the thin veil of legitimacy, Altaf Khanani constructed a financial empire so vast and intricate that it evaded even the most advanced surveillance systems. His tool of choice wasn't blockchain or Swiss banking. It was older, simpler, and infinitely more dangerous. Hawala, a centuries-old money transfer system grounded not in paper trails but in trust. Hawala left no receipts, no digital fingerprints, no accountable endpoints. In the hands of Khanani, it was reinvented for the 21st century, a phantom network capable of eclipsing entire regulatory frameworks. While Hawala had long served expatriates and migrant workers for remittances, Khanani saw its deeper potential, a decentralized, unregulated global vault. With agents spread across continents, his organization could move millions, sometimes billions, in a single day without triggering a single red flag in mainstream financial institutions. Khanani's operations were headquartered in Karachi but extended far beyond the city's borders. The UAE became a central hub, a safe zone where lax regulations and booming commerce provided ideal cover. From there, his tendrils reached into London's financial district, the banking corridors of Singapore, the streets of Toronto, and even the alleyways of Sydney. Wherever there was capital flow, Khanani had an anchor, a courier, a shell company, or a broker in the shadows. What stunned investigators wasn't merely the scale of his empire, but its clientele. Altaf wasn't laundering cash for petty criminals or local syndicates. He served the world's most dangerous players, those whose fingerprints were on terror attacks, drug shipments, and arms deals. The Taliban, Hezbollah, Lashkar-e-Taiba, and Al-Qaeda all appeared in association with his money laundering network, according to U.S. Department of Treasury sanctions. The terrorists responsible for both the 1993 and 2008 Mumbai attacks, massacres that shook the Indian subcontinent, allegedly had financial backing that passed through Kanani's invisible pipeline. Drug money from Mexican and Colombian cartels flowed into his channels, and dirty cash from outlaw motorcycle gangs in Australia and Canada slipped into clean investments via his schemes. He had no allegiance to cause or country, only to currency. Whether it was blood money, black market gains, or terror funds, Kanani moved it with the same dispassionate precision. His was an empire without borders, built on relationships rather than regulation. Family members, trusted lieutenants, and global contacts sustained the machinery. The brilliance of Kanani's operation was that it never needed a skyscraper or a central office. It lived in trust, thrived on secrecy, and vanished into the systems we all rely on. Chapter 3. The Moscow Connection. The first real crack in Altaf Kanani's fortress came not from an undercover sting or an intercepted phone call, but from paperwork, dry bureaucratic filings buried deep within suspicious activity reports submitted by Standard Chartered Bank's New York branch. The reports, later leaked through the explosive FinCEN files investigation, illuminated a pattern, an anomaly so repetitive it screamed orchestration. And at the heart of it all was a name that sent tremors through global financial watchdogs: the Moscow Network. Unlike traditional laundering trails tied to cartels or criminal gangs, the Moscow Network was a sophisticated construct of shell companies, offshore accounts, and falsified trades, with Russian capital as its lifeblood. Among the 54 front companies exposed, one name repeatedly surfaced: Mazaka General Trading LLC, a Dubai-based firm that functioned as one of Kanani's main pipelines. On paper, Mazaka dealt in everything from construction materials to electronics. In reality, it was little more than a spreadsheet, moving millions across borders under the guise of commerce. Between 2013 and 2016, Kanani's network received at least $49.78 million through this channel alone, though experts believe the real figure was far higher. What made these transactions especially dangerous was their method: mirror trading. In this practice, securities are purchased in one country and simultaneously sold in another, with identical volumes and prices. No capital gains, no losses, just a trail of clean, seemingly legitimate money divorced from its criminal origin. This sleight of hand allowed Kanani to effectively ghost the global banking system. The transactions weren't flagged because they didn't technically break traditional banking rules. But when investigators revisited the patterns, a disturbing picture emerged, one of deliberate, high-volume laundering using the same platforms trusted by the world's largest investors. The banks were unwitting accomplices. JP Morgan Chase in New York processed some of these funds, as did United Overseas Bank in Singapore and Bank of Baroda's Dubai branch. Their compliance departments filed reports, but the sheer complexity of the transactions often buried the red flags. What looked like routine trade activity was, in fact, the laundering of illicit proceeds from heroin sales, arms deals, and extremist funding under layers of false legitimacy. Key to this operation was ASK Trading Pte, a Singapore-based firm tied closely to Kanani's lieutenants. This entity served as a proxy trader, moving vast sums in and out of Asian markets while mimicking the activity of legitimate investors. With no factory floors, no inventory, and no physical goods, ASK Trading existed solely to facilitate the illusion of lawful commerce. Kanani's Moscow connection underscored a chilling evolution in financial crime. This was no longer the world of duffel bags and back-alley exchanges. It was a realm of algorithms, digital ledgers, and cross-border investments. It was laundering redefined for the post-globalization era, hidden not in shadows, but in plain sight, behind the very systems designed to stop it. Chapter 4. Rangoli and the Indian Trail. India, long a target of both geopolitical rivalries and cross-border terror, found itself entangled in a web far more insidious than armed skirmishes or fiery rhetoric. It came cloaked in bank statements, hidden in trade invoices, and whispered in the language of commerce. At the center of this silent invasion stood a seemingly innocuous company, Rangoli International Private Limited, headquartered in New Delhi. But behind the colorful name lay something far grimmer, a direct financial artery linking Altaf Kanani's global money laundering machine to the Indian subcontinent. Between 2009 and 2016, a staggering $10.65 million flowed between Rangoli and shell firms under Kanani's command. On its own, the figure might have appeared modest within the ocean of global trade. But context changed everything. Rangoli was already under scrutiny by Indian financial regulators. The company had reported sales of over 339 Indian rupee crores, impressive on paper, but simultaneously declared a loss of nearly 75 Indian rupees crores. The contradiction triggered red flags at the Punjab National Bank, Central Bank of India, and Vijaya Bank, all of which began quietly classifying Rangoli as a willful defaulter. A term used sparingly, willful defaulter, applies to entities that have the capacity to repay loans but choose not to, often a hallmark of front companies used in financial crime. It was a June 18, 2014, transaction that cracked the shell wide open. A sum of $136,254 moved from one of Kanani's offshore entities into Rangoli's account via Punjab National Bank. The transaction, flagged internally but left uninvestigated for months, eventually caught the eye of the Enforcement Directorate. What followed was a chain reaction of disclosures that would pull in not only India's financial watchdogs but also its intelligence services. Deeper forensic tracing revealed multiple cross-border payments between Rangoli and other offshore firms with ties to Pakistan and the Middle East. Several of these firms were already known to Indian agencies as conduits for extremist financing. Suddenly, Kanani's Indian footprint wasn't just about money, it was about ideology, warfare, and the funding of terror cells operating within the country's borders. Kanani's Indian channel was allegedly used to fund Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed, two of the most lethal terror organizations responsible for devastating attacks on Indian soil. These weren't just speculative links. Intelligence intercepts confirmed coded communication referencing Rangoli and associated firms as vendors, an innocuous term masking a far more sinister purpose. Kanani had managed what few had thought possible, infiltrating India's financial ecosystem with surgical precision. His network exploited regulatory blind spots, institutional complacency, and the trust-based architecture of South Asian trade to funnel dirty money into clean accounts. The trail from Karachi to New Delhi was no longer theoretical. It was inked in bank ledgers, emails, and suspicious SWIFT transactions. And just like that, India's war on terror gained a new battlefield, its balance sheets. Chapter 5. Fall from the summit. The summit from which Altaf Kanani fell wasn't made of stone or steel. It was woven from trust, fear, and silence. For years, he had operated as the invisible architect of illicit finance, a man known more by codenames and whispers than photographs or interviews. But in September 2016, the curtain was finally yanked away. The operation was meticulously planned. Working under a sealed indictment from June 2015, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration coordinated with regional allies to snare Kanani at Tucumán International Airport in Panama City. He never saw it coming. As far as he knew, Panama was safe, a neutral staging ground in the geopolitical chessboard he'd mastered. But this time, the trap was set with American precision. The charges were grave. 14 counts of international money laundering, each carrying the potential to imprison him for decades. The indictment detailed how Kanani's network moved billions through shadowy transfers that fueled drug cartels in Mexico, terror networks in the Middle East, and transnational criminal gangs across the globe. His was not merely a financial empire, it was a channel for global destabilization, built on trust but weaponized by greed. Yet, when the courtroom doors opened in Miami, Altaf Kanani didn't walk in as the global kingpin the press had expected. He entered quietly, pale and subdued, opting for the one move that had kept him alive his entire career: negotiation, a plea bargain. In exchange for a lighter sentence, and many believe, in return for sharing intelligence on others in the global underground economy, Kanani pleaded guilty to a single count of conspiracy to commit money laundering. He was sentenced to 68 months in federal prison, a fine of $250,000, and indefinite supervision after release. To many, it seemed like a slap on the wrist for a man who had greased the financial wheels of the underworld for decades. But behind the scenes, the damage to his empire was catastrophic. The U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control moved swiftly. Kanani and his inner circle were officially blacklisted, with the organization designated a transnational criminal organization, a classification typically reserved for drug cartels, human traffickers, and mafia-style syndicates. Along with Kanani himself, his son Obaid Kanani and nephew Huzaifa Kanani were placed on the OFAC sanctions list, effectively freezing any assets or business interests they held in the United States or with American allies. But the sanctions didn't stop at individuals. A laundry list of front companies and affiliate firms came under the OFAC hammer, spanning cities from Dubai to Toronto, Karachi to Sydney, and London to Singapore. Each entity was either directly controlled by Kanani or used as a pass-through for laundering funds across borders. Mazaka General Trading LLC, Al Zaruni Exchange, and Ask Trading Pte. Were among the most prominent. Banking partners scrambled to disassociate themselves, accounts were shut down, properties seized, and entire businesses dissolved overnight. And yet, for all the high drama and righteous declarations of justice, the fall of Altaf Kanani came with a tinge of unease. Though dismantled in structure, his influence lingered in the shadows. The same networks he'd built, based on hawala, blind trusts, and human intermediaries, were not easily eradicated. The OFAC designation made it risky to do business with anyone linked to the Kanani family, but it didn't erase the system that had enabled them. In Pakistan, the reaction was telling. While Javed Kanani's suicide in 2016 had drawn headlines, Altaf's arrest and conviction barely registered in the mainstream press. Some suggested state complicity, others pointed to the deeply embedded nature of money laundering within the subcontinent's informal economy. There were whispers that elements within intelligence agencies had long leveraged Kanani's network for their own covert operations, turning a blind eye to the narcotics and terror funding as long as political ends were met. Altaf's sentence, meanwhile, ran its course quietly. There were no dramatic courtroom revelations, no confessions to his full scope of operations, no tell-all memoirs. By the time of his release in 2020, the world had largely moved on, but within intelligence circles, his name remained active, his release marked in red ink on classified reports as a man still carrying a vault of secrets. The question that remained was chilling in its simplicity. Did Altaf Kanani truly fall, or did he simply vanish into a quieter version of the same shadow world? For all the agencies that celebrated the takedown, the uncomfortable truth was this: the system Kanani exploited was still alive. Cryptocurrencies had added new layers of anonymity. Trade-based laundering had grown more complex, and while Kanani's name may have faded, a dozen new operators had risen to take his place, each learning from the master's mistakes. Altaf Kanani's fall may have been real, but the summit from which he tumbled? That summit still stands, hidden in the fog of offshore accounts, encrypted messages, and silent transactions. Chapter 6. The Invisible Bank. Altaf Kanani was no warlord, no politician, no street thug, yet his influence reached into the veins of global power structures. He built a bank without walls, a currency without borders, and an empire without a flag. In a world obsessed with surveillance, algorithms, and data, Kanani reminded us of a chilling truth: the most powerful forces are still the ones we can't see. He was the shadow banker, and for years, he held the keys to a billion-dollar underworld economy until the shadows swallowed him back. If this glimpse into the hidden world of illicit finance intrigued you, there's more where that came from. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a dive into the underworld of global crime.